Pacifica Radio, I'm Christina Onnested. Israel launched overnight strikes on a designated safe zone for Palestinians who have fled Rafah in Al-Mawasi. International media, including Wafa news agency, report the Israeli military launched air, land, and sea attacks on Al-Mawasi starting at midnight. At least 30 Palestinians are reported dead across the Gaza Strip as Israel's war rages on. The death toll now topping 37,200. In southern Gaza, the United Nations Children's Agency UNICEF warns nearly 3,000 children have been cut off from treatment for moderate to severe acute malnutrition, putting them at risk of death as violence and displacement continues to impact access to health care facilities. Meanwhile, independent experts at the United Nations released a report Wednesday accusing both Hamas and Israel of war crimes and crimes against humanity during Hamas's October 7th attack and Israel's ensuing war. Accusations include charging Israel with the crime of extermination. The AP's Charles de Ledesma reports.
UN-backed human rights experts say in a new report, Israeli forces and Palestinian militants engaged in sexual and gender-based violence during the first months of the Israel-Hamas war. The study, which covered the time between the October 7 rampage and the end of last year, laid out a wide array of alleged rights violations and crimes, saying Israeli forces have committed acts including forced starvation, murder or willful killing, collective punishment and intentional attacks on civilians, and that the military wing of Hamas and other armed Palestinian groups had performed deliberate killings and mistreatment of civilians and hostage takings. I'm Charles de Ledesma.
The U.S. House of Representatives voted to block funding for the reconstruction of Gaza. The provision tucked into the NDAA National Defense Spending Bill Wednesday passed the Republican-controlled chamber. Media reports say Democrats opposed it. It passed with a voice vote. Meanwhile, House Republicans also voted to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress for refusing to turn over audio of President Joe Biden's interview over his handling of classified documents. It comes just weeks after the White House blocked the release of the recording to lawmakers. Christopher Martinez has more.
Republican Jim Jordan is chair of the Judiciary Committee.
The committees need the audio recordings to determine whether the Justice Department appropriately carried out justice.
And he had something else on his mind.
What we do know is this: one former president's being charged, Joe Biden's not being. We think we're entitled, actually we know we're entitled, to all the evidence and the best evidence. And the transcripts alone are not sufficient evidence of the state of the president's memory.
Democrats strongly opposed the resolution. For one thing, they say Garland has complied with the subpoena, turning over everything the Judiciary Committee asked for, except for that one audio recording. And on that, Garland turned over a written transcript of the interview, which Democrats say is the usual practice. Hank Johnson is a Democrat from Georgia.
This do-nothing Congress can't pass legislation to help the American people and also can't prove any wrongdoing by President Biden. They're running out of time and they are desperate. Plus, their own presidential candidate, Donald Trump, just became a convicted felon according to a jury of his peers. So MAGA Republicans are trying to shift the blame to someone else.
The White House has invoked executive privilege to block release of the audio, saying Republicans only want to chop them up to use them for political purposes. I'm Christopher Martinez.
Donald Trump travels to Capitol Hill today to meet with Senate and House Republicans for the first time since the deadly January 6, 2021 attack, and amidst federal charges against Trump for conspiring to overturn the 2020 presidential election, and a fresh guilty verdict in a separate New York election interference hush money trial. Trump is expected to discuss party priorities. Politico's reporting he also has another agenda, getting Congress to overturn his conviction and retribution at the system that allowed the prosecution against him. He's already had some success with a Republican bill that would move state prosecutions of a president to federal courts, seen as a rebuke to the New York hush money case against him. President Joe Biden is in Italy for a G7 summit, which begins today. Agreement has been reached on a U.S. proposal to use frozen Russian assets to back a $50 billion loan to Ukraine, giving Kiev a strong show of support even as Europe's political chessboard shifts to the right after EU elections. A coalition of immigrant advocacy groups sued the Biden administration Wednesday over President Biden's recent directive that effectively halts asylum claims at the U.S.-Mexico border. The suit argues it's similar to a Trump administration policy that was blocked by the courts previously. The lawsuit was filed by the American Civil Liberties Union and others on behalf of Las Americas Immigrant Advocacy Center and the Refugee and Immigrant Center for Education and Legal Services. It's the first test of the legality of Biden's sweeping crackdown on the U.S.-Mexico border this election year. The head of the UN Refugee Agency says some aspects of the president's executive order barring asylum may violate refugee protection required in international law. Filippo Grandi, UN High Commissioner for Refugees, voiced concerns to the Associated Press as his agency issued its annual Global Trends report for 2023 today. It finds the number of people who've been forcibly displaced rose to 120 million in 2023, 6 million more than the year before. I'm Christina Onestad reporting for Pacifica Radio.